Preparing. Okay, I think we are live now. Good morning, everybody. Nice to see everyone this morning for the Montgomery County Delegation's Education, Elections, and Housing Committee briefing on the November elections. We are so delighted to have a wonderful group. We are live now. Good. We're live now? Great.
Yep, we're good.
Okay. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good morning. It's so nice to see everybody. We're so delighted to be here today for this morning's Montgomery County Delegation elections briefing with the county's Committee on Education, Elections, and Housing. I'm Delegate Shetty. It's so nice to see you today. Really excited to be joined this morning with two panels of witnesses. Panel one includes Jim Shalik and David Naiman from the Montgomery County Board of Elections. Good morning and welcome. And panel two includes advocates from Common Cause Maryland, the National Council of Jewish Women's Maryland Action Team, and CASA. So good morning and welcome to all of our advocates and our witnesses who will be here today to share the plan for the November elections, making sure that every single eligible Maryland voter in Montgomery County is able to safely access their ballot. We learned a lot of lessons, I think, in the primary this year. Obviously, we're still in the throes of the pandemic and have an anticipated surge in the fall. So making sure that every voter has access to their ballot safely is going to be really critical. I think many of you know this, but I happen to be in a very high risk category myself, and I'm immunocompromised. So this is very personal to me, making sure that all of our volunteers, our election judges, and voters are able to vote safely. With that, I will just note one bit of housekeeping. So members of the committee and members of the delegation, if you wish to submit questions for our panelists, if you wouldn't mind either submitting your question via the chat, or if you'd like to be recognized live. I would prefer if you want to be recognized live and ask your question live, that would be fine. But just note in the chat that you have a question and I'll put you in a queue and we'll call on you when it's time. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Mr. Shalik and Mr. Naiman from the Board of Elections, who will share a bit about the local plan to ensure that our November elections are conducted safely.
Well, Delegate Shetty, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. And it's good to see my friend David with his jacket on, looking good. David and I are working very closely with the rest of our board to make sure that what you said happens. As we talk, everything is still not settled. Yesterday, I didn't listen to the meeting, I was in court, but apparently the state board now is considering for their meeting tomorrow to recommend to the governor that we don't have precinct voting, but we have voting centers around the county. Our board election director and the state board are considering for Montgomery County using the high schools as voting centers. I believe we have 25 high schools. That number also is still unresolved. And that the plan would do away with the early voting from October 22nd for 8 days and have the voting centers open from October 29th through Election Day. So that would incorporate early voting and Election Day, a straight, was it 29, 30, a straight 6 days, I guess, of voting at one of the voting centers. Our board has been very proactive, and I know David can fill in more detail. We've been very proactive with making sure that the elections run smoothly and the canvass. Most people think when the polls close, our job is over and we go home. Incorrect. You know, I'm expecting close to 500,000 votes. And we've asked the state board to recommend to the governor that we can start counting ballots around October 1st. Right now, we can't open ballots and start counting until November 5, which means the canvass could go a month or two, missing a lot of dates. So A lot is in flux. We're waiting for tomorrow's meeting and what the governor says. But whatever the governor says, we're going to implement it in a bipartisan way. David, did I miss anything on the big picture?
No, you didn't. Let me just add a few comments of my own. First of all, it's true that Jim and I will certainly, and the rest of the board will work to implement things in a bipartisan way. That does not mean that we all have the same opinion about what the governor has done. And I know that you don't want to spend all of your time today about that, but I disagree with many aspects of what he's done. Rather than kind of focusing too much on that, what I've attempted to do is to focus on all the ways in which we can make whatever system we have to implement work. As you all may know, he only has something to say about the process if he invokes his emergency authority. When he tells us follow the law, that's basically, we follow the law whether he tells us to or not. That's what we do under normal circumstances. But we have a public health emergency, even he acknowledges that. And so our situation is somewhat different. So when Jim says that we've been proactive, at our last meeting on my motion, we voted to ask for two things from the state board and the governor that the current state law does not provide for. One of them deals with the vote centers or precincts, as Jim was talking about. There's a state law that says that every polling place every precinct has to have its own polling place, either in the precinct or in an adjacent precinct. Ordinarily, I think that's a good rule. We don't want, in fact, I've been an advocate and the board has supported me that polling places should not only be in the precinct, they should be in the precinct in a location where people can walk to them. But under these circumstances, we can't guarantee that every polling place is going to be in the precinct or adjacent to the precinct, because we may, if we only have 25 polling places, then we may not be able to do that. So that's one thing that we really need an exception to. And then the other is the law that says that we can't open the ballots until November the 5th, which is the Thursday after the election. If we do that, we really do, I wouldn't say run the risk, because I don't think we would allow that to happen. But it becomes much more difficult to get the counting done in time for the Electoral College meeting on December the 14th. In my view, all of us should quit if we can't get the count done in time for the Electoral College meeting. So, if we have to work, shifts of people around the clock, we will, from my perspective at least, we will do that. That's not an option to miss that. But we'd be much better if we can get everybody to vote earlier and then start counting their ballots earlier. Now, I don't know if you want me to launch into it now, but I have made kind of a list of suggestions for voters in terms of how they can manage the current process to make their lives easier and at the same time make our lives easier. So for example, voters have a choice of how to apply for their absentee ballot or vote by mail, and also how to receive their ballot, whether by online delivery or by US mail. My own view is that the easiest way to apply for it, sadly, it is not the state website, which is highly complicated, unless they've said they're going to simplify it. I haven't had a chance to check it out yet. But if they haven't simplified it, I wouldn't, while it would make our job easier to point people there, I think it's very confusing. I think they have to make it less confusing. I think the easiest way for most people to do this is to download the PDF, fill it out, sign it, and then you don't actually have to mail it back. You can email it back to absentee@montgomerycountymd.gov. And that gets it directly to the people who have to process it. And I would strongly encourage all voters. I've been an advocate, as many of you know, and Mark has probably heard from me about this more often than he'd care to, that I've been an advocate for keeping the ability of voters to get online ballot delivery. And certainly if we get near the end where you're worried about the Postal Service, you want to have that as an option. But I really would encourage people strongly to use the US mail option, which has much less hassle. If you use the online ballot delivery option, it's your own paper, your own ink, your own envelope. You have to address it. You have to figure out whether you're sending it to the state or to us, you know, as to where you're sending it, and you have to apply your own stamp. But thanks to all of you, you know, if you get the US mail absentee ballot, oh, and I left out, of course, that if you do the online ballot delivery, there's the whole duplication process that we have to go through, which is what makes it difficult for us. I don't think the average voter is as concerned about that, but certainly that will lengthen the time it takes for us drastically if people do that. If you use the US mail option, then you know, we send you, or the contractor sends you, you know, a pre-addressed envelope, a postage paid envelope to send it back. So what, all you have to do is sign the oath on the envelope. Make sure you don't sign your ballot. Signing the ballot throws out the ballot. Signing the oath is a requirement. And I think it'll be much easier for everyone. So anyway, those are just some examples. I certainly have more if you guys are interested. We're doing the best we can with a situation that we did not create. And in the sense of the public health situation, obviously none of us created it, but in terms of how we respond to that, I think we're going to do everything possible to make it as safe as we can possibly make it. The safest thing, of course, is to encourage people to vote by mail as much as they can.
Delegate Shetty, let me just, if I can, to me, the underlying issue here are the following numbers. I mean, the numbers run the election, and basically, we need 3,994 workers, including judges, for election day. And we need, if someone doesn't work both election day and early voting, we need 3,400 early voting judges and workers. As we talk, and again, this is in flux, but as we talk, we have 2,408 vacancies for election day, and an additional 2,178 early voting vacancies. As we talk, in the last few weeks, we've received 761 applications to serve, and usually of that, maybe half will eventually serve. They drop out of training, whatever. So we're in big trouble in terms of numbers of judges. In addition, a number of our precincts have told us they are not going to open their doors for voting. So that's the problem. Judges and precinct locations. And that's what we're faced with. We can't manufacture judges. So the plan has to work based upon the numbers I've just told you. I'm not optimistic that we're going to get the 4,000 people to work on election day. It's not there.
If the status of the virus changes, obviously, you know, we always lose some judges right before the election without the virus. With it, obviously, there's an even greater chance that at the last minute we could end up losing people.
But notwithstanding the dire numbers I just told you, in the primary, we had, I think, David, about 273,000 votes, notwithstanding all the problems. And that was about 23,000 more votes than the presidential primary in 2016. So with the pandemic, the mail issues, over 250,000 people still voted in our county. So I'm anticipating close to 500,000 votes. We're bigger than 5 states.
I want to add to what Jim just said in a way that he wouldn't say it, which is that a certain elected official has been calling the primary an unmitigated disaster. And that's just not true. There were lots of problems. I would be the first to tell you that there were problems, but the idea that we actually increased both by numbers and percentage the turnout from the 2016 election to the 2020 election. And remember, in the 2020 election, the presidential race was essentially over in both parties. And in the 2016 election, the presidential race was continuing in both parties. The idea that we increased our turnout during those circumstances actually, I think, is a very big point.
And big issue we're having too is these numbers I read to you, we can't recruit like we used to at fairs, street festivals. So we're doing it all by social media. And Gilberto, our communications director has done a great job going to as many events as he can, notwithstanding the pandemic. So we're trying to recruit, but it's tough. You can't do it person to person anymore, really. So we send out the word, but when it's dribbling in 741 applications, and half of them won't even show up for training. So that's the big issue for me. We just don't have the people or the places. That's why this state plan can give us the flexibility to have voting centers, big centers, high schools, where people can vote. And if the plan goes through, to have October 29th through November 3rd as of early voting / election day, that hopefully would alleviate long lines, I would hope. But
Let me just add
we
one
don't
thing
know.
about the high schools, which I know that our elections director has already pointed out to us. We may want to have anywhere from 1 to 3 additional locations if it turns out that high schools are going to be the locations. There's some places where we really don't have a nearby high school. And for example, downtown Silver Spring is one of them, where ever since Montgomery Blair moved it to Four Corners, more than 20 years ago, there really isn't an easily walkable location from downtown Silver Spring. So we would probably want to add the Silver Spring Civic Building as a location. I would think that I haven't kind of looked at the whole map yet to see where the other places are where we would need to add in addition to where high schools are. And I don't know whether we'll have the personnel to do it, but I would want to have at least some flexibility to do that, based on the where the voters are.
I agree with that. And we still don't know if this plan is going to go through. As we talk, we have a regular election on the calendar. So we're waiting for the state board tomorrow and then the governor. So as we talk, we're just hypothesizing about the 25 sites. But any help that the delegation can give us in reaching out to get voters and to support the state board would be certainly helpful. I really appreciate Delegate Shetty, your leadership on this. It's very important. Because if the election doesn't work, it's just so unfair. There's so much interest in this race. As you can see by the numbers in the primary, 273,000 people weathered all the issues and voted. So we're all in it together. So that's the overview. There's a proposed plan. We don't know if it's going to happen. And whatever it is, we're going to implement it. And no matter what the governor says, we'll do what we can. But it's the numbers. That's the key, the people.
Okay, thank you to our Board of Elections witnesses for this very informative presentation. I know we have a number of colleagues who have questions, so if I may exercise my own prerogative, I'm going to ask one quick follow-up, and then the queue thus far is Delegate Luedtke, Delegate Corman, and then Delegate Palakovich-Carr. Others who have questions, please note so in the chat. I will add you to the queue. So my quick question, please, Mr. Shalek, you noted obviously there's a little bit of uncertainty at the moment as to whether we will have all precincts open or move to a voting center model. Can you quickly share what the timeline is for when we might know, and then how the move could impact the number of volunteers needed and the number of precincts that will actually be open if we move to that latter model?
Well, we've urged the governor in previous letters and the state board, we need a decision ASAP. You can't sign up for an election judge or worker after October 9th. So everything is in motion, training for judges, getting facilities. We have to sign contracts with the facilities. We have to do the cleaning. So the timing is urgent, as sooner the better. That's why the state board's having an emergency meeting tomorrow to get their final plan to the governor, to get hopefully within days or a week, a response. Certainly we'll need less judges if we have, let's say, 25 or so voting centers. Certainly that will decrease the numbers. But we just don't know what the final number will be on judges. And what was the last part of your question?
It's sort of a comparison of how many judges you need under the current model and how many judges you would need under a voting center model.
Well, right now, what I said before is we need
Almost 4,000 for the.
about 4,000 for election day, right?
Which is never going to happen. I mean, that's,
No.
I mean, we can wish it all we want. We have enough trouble getting them under normal circumstances. There's no way that we're going to get 4,000 people or almost 4,000
I'm
people
looking up
to serve as election judges. I mean, but it's, at our last board meeting, we had talked about a scenario for 75 polling places. Normally there's about 230. We had talked about using the high schools and the middle schools at our last board meeting. And now we're talking, although personally, I would be fine with having 11 early voting centers for, and just do it for many days. But as you know, the governor keeps saying that we have to have election day voting. We just have to figure out what that's going to mean. And it's easy to say what you want, and it's a lot harder to deliver the people to do it. I don't know that I can tell people automatically, oh, it's, you definitely should do this. I mean, I think it's a very personal decision for each individual as to whether they want to be an election judge. Some people know that they're in a category where where they shouldn't do it. Some people know that they have others in their family who are in a category that means they shouldn't do it. And some people just don't know what the situation is. And so it's very hard. Our staff has, I think, done an excellent job of identifying some of the things that we can do to make it safer. And we're trying to get plexiglass shields, and we're going to have wipes, and we're going to try and wipe down, the areas where people are doing their votes while making sure we don't get the ballots wet. Because if the ballots get wet, that's a problem, with the scanner. And we're even trying to have enough pens so that we don't have to, share pens. I mean, they've really actually done an excellent job of thinking about all of the different things that we can do to make it safer. But that doesn't mean that for every individual, I can say to them, you should do this. None of us can make any guarantees for that. So I think that the best thing we can do is to try and balance, the public health need and the election need. I'm hoping that we will encourage people as much as we can to vote by mail. Anyone who can vote by mail should vote by mail. And then have enough locations and enough days of voting in those locations to cover the people who can't vote by mail, and to do it as carefully as we can. And I think that's really the most that we can do.
Well, I think the main issue between the state board and the governor's been insistent on having all of the precincts open. Voting centers are not precincts.
Right.
So that's a main issue that has to be resolved between the governor and the state board. Voting centers, by definition, are not precincts. So that's the key issue that we're waiting to hear. The governor may insist on having the precincts, and then we have to ask, which we will be, for consolidation of precincts. Have 5 or 6 or 8 precincts at one location, which is separate than voting centers. So there's a big issue to be resolved, hopefully within days. But,
it's separate from voting centers, but it's not that different. I mean, it's really, that there's going to be a lot of similarity. I mean, I don't know yet whether we're going to be telling people that you can vote at any of the 25 locations, regardless of where you live, or whether we're going to be saying, these X number of precincts, these 8 to 10 precincts are in, right, location 1, and these other 8 to 10 precincts are in location 2. I mean, that would be closer to a more traditional election day arrangement to do it, the latter way. And it also would make it easier in terms of ballot styles and, that kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, I'm actually quite worried over the idea that It's easy to insist that we're going to have polling places, in every precinct. It's just, I don't know how we would do it. I don't think it's actually possible for us to do. I think one of these other scenarios is going to have to be the scenario just because of the numbers of people.
Well, you touched on the two different paths for these 25 centers. One is that each center have X number of precincts, and I think that the intent was more like an early voting, because the intent of the state board is to have these centers open from October 29th through November 3rd, which is an election early voting model, because they're not going to have early voting if they have the centers from October 29th to November 3rd. So it seems like maybe their intent is to have like 25 centers open for 6 days as an early voting option. I don't know.
Okay, well, thank you. That helps clarify some. I'd love to turn to some of my colleagues who have questions. First in the queue is Majority Leader Luedtke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. Shalik, Mr. Naaman, thank you for the work you're doing. I know this is probably the most difficult election that either of you have helped see on the board. I have one request and one question. So my request, first of all, to your point earlier about the delegation's role in getting information out to the public. I think I'm sure I can speak for every member of the delegation in saying we are happy to get out whatever information you need, but it would be helpful if you could ask the board staff to share with us, to the extent possible, any promotional materials related to recruitment of election judges, information about mail-in balloting. Then we can get that information out through our networks on social media, email, whatever it is.
Great idea.
My question, Mr. Naaman, I think you mentioned this, and I agree completely that we should be encouraging voters to apply for mail-in ballots as much as possible, though my personal preference would be that we just mail everyone a ballot. That doesn't seem to be in the cards. Do you have a sense so far of what the pace of mail-in ballot requests is? Are people requesting ballots or at a higher or lower rate than before, or do we just not have the data yet to know?
I don't have exact numbers, and I don't know, Jim, whether you.
Well, I saw in the Post today that it said that we had like 72,000 requests.
Is that in our county?
That's what the Post said. I don't have it in front of me.
I know that there's been,
and
I know that there's been, we didn't get that from our staff, but I know that,
No.
and we can get that for you. I know that there's been an extraordinary amount of interest so far. I would not say it's the same as usual. I would say that people are, they're not waiting to get the application in the mail. I have neighbors who, who are stopping me on the street, literally, if I'm on my walk, and they'll say, okay, which way should I request this? And what method of voting should I do? And all that, which never would happen in a past election ever. So I think that there's a high amount of awareness about this. Obviously, it's never high enough, and we want to get the word out to everyone that that we can. But I think, and we would have to get you the actual number, but I think that it's definitely, there's a lot of interest. Now, I will say, I think we can do a better job on our website of making it easier for people to get that information, just, if they go to our website looking for it. I also think that, and I've told this to our staff multiple times, that we need to put on our website, for those who are interested in being election judges, what we're doing to, to make polling places safe. Because as everyone makes their own personal decision as to whether they want to do that, part of the decision is not just, am I free that day and how do I feel about it and what's my health? Part of the decision is, what are you doing to make this, as safe as it can be? So I'm hoping that we'll be able to provide that information, both on our own, in our own network, and also, out to you guys so that you can spread it as well.
Thank you. Delegate Corman, Chair Corman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you both for your practical leadership on this. David, just for your benefit, Nikki Charleston reported this morning that the online simplification would go live probably in the next week or 10 days. It's still not going to be very simple, though, to be honest with you, based on the description she has provided to members of the delegation. My question is, I don't know if this has been discussed yet. Maybe it came up on yesterday's state board meeting and you're aware, but what's the thinking on drop boxes, particularly if we go with a consolidated precinct or voting center model?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Right now, I think we had 6. And our
In the
board,
primary.
for the primary, our board voted unanimously to get at least 6 more to accommodate what last week was early voting scenario. If we have 25 voting centers, we're going to ask for more. But we've already asked for an extra 6 of them. They cost about $2,000 each. So there was some budget concerns and locations, because each one has to have a security component, a security camera 24/7, and the cost involved. So we've asked for 6 more. So as of now, we've asked for 12, but if it's a voting center scenario, we're going to ask for more.
On our side, to me, that's very cheap as far as budget goes. The idea to me, we voted to have them at every early voting center. I would add that if we can get them established in a way that people don't have to get out of their cars to use them, that would solve a lot of issues, because I saw many traffic issues on election day with people trying to just drop off their ballot versus people trying to get in line. And, if you have to park to use the drop box, then you're adding to, you're making it harder for people who actually are staying to vote. I would advocate having them, as many of them as we can at every polling place. Unfortunately, there's obviously a high demand for drop boxes across the country right now. So I don't know what we'll be able to acquire. But I think that they would be a good way of getting things to work. I actually ended up dropping my family's ballots into the drop box at Wheaton, and I had a spy at the Board of Elections who told me that they arrived the next day. That obviously, when people are worried about the mail system, which I hope is not going to end up being a problem, but you never know. If we have the drop boxes, then hopefully that gives people another option.
And don't forget, Delegate, that the location is dictated by the security perimeter. So we don't have that much discretion on where to put them. There's a security component that goes with each drop box. You know what? One of the surprises in the primary that I heard was how many people don't trust the U.S. mail. I mean, I'm an old guy and I've never had a problem with the U.S. mail, but I can't tell you how many people don't like mailing letters.
It's hard to imagine who's sowing that discontent. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Delegate Polakovich-Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a question and a comment. First, if one of the board members could say what the time frame is at this point in terms of when the applications for mail-in ballots are going to be sent to all active voters in Montgomery County.
Linda Lamone wrote to the governor, and she said that they're going to start being mailed out August 24th, but no later than, I think she said August 27th or 30th. But they're starting
I'm going to find it.
August 24th, David, is what Linda Lamone said.
Yeah.
Voters who have already requested a mail-in ballot, will they be receiving a duplicate application, or are they going to be scrubbed from the list? Do we have details on that yet?
My understanding is that they're going to be scrubbed from the list, that they're only going to send to people who haven't already sent. And I also know from our staff that one of their requests of us is that people should pick one way to request their ballot and not pick more than one. That picking more than one is and I realize that people are going to worry that whichever way they picked didn't work. But the best thing would be is to, one way of requesting your ballot.
Great.
One unfortunate incident we had at the primary, someone would get a mail-in ballot, absentee ballot, and send it in. And then they would still, because they hadn't heard, they would go vote. And we were faced with the dilemma of someone who voted, but had previously sent in an absentee ballot. So
And
a
under
few people, there was a number of people that voted twice.
And I will say under the state board's regulations, which we have as a board unanimously disagreed with and written to them, but they haven't changed. If you do that, as in if you send in your absentee ballot, you get nervous, you don't see on the website that it's been received, and then you go vote at the polls and you get a provisional ballot, we are supposed to throw them both out. I think the theory being it's a punishment for voting twice. And the oath that you sign on either the provisional ballot or the absentee ballot says that you've only voted once. On the other hand, I understand the anxiety of the person who wants to absolutely make sure that their ballot was received and they're not sure whether it was. But one of the messages that you might want to get out to people is that the best way to make sure of that is to vote as early as possible, and that way you don't have to worry when it gets close to election day as to whether you have to go into the polls, because it will already register that it's been received. But it does take some time before it shows on the website that it's been received. One of the things that makes it take extra time is that we established with our staff that when the ballots come in, there's a 24-hour period where they won't touch them. And that's because of making sure that that's the last information that we had was that coronavirus can only survive on paper for 24 hours. Now, the chances of transmission that way is probably pretty slim, but we just figured it's easier, like, okay, the ballots come in, you just let them sit for 24 hours. Well, that's 24 more hours that delays when we can get a record that it's been received, and then it has to go to the state, and then the state has to upload the information for their website. So there is, I believe that I mailed our ballots on Friday evening, and I believe that that maybe on election day, that Tuesday, it showed as being received. So I mean, it takes a few days, and that's part of the problem.
One note, another disqualification that's very unfortunate. A number of voters didn't sign the envelope, they signed the ballot. And the law requires that any marking on a ballot other than a vote disqualifies the ballot. So
it has to be an identifying mark, but
Right.
For example, we also have voters who make a mistake. And if you make a mistake at the polling place, they spoil your ballot and give you a new one. But if you make a mistake on your mail-in ballot, they would cross it out and then they would initial it, or they'd sign it. And if you initial it or sign it, we have to throw out your ballot. So basically, if they make a mistake, they can do anything possible to tell us what they actually want to do. They can write an arrow that says not this one, and an arrow to the other one that says this is my vote. But they can't put their name or their initials on the ballot, or we're required to throw it out.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying on all of that. I did just want to make one comment to point out that right now the Montgomery County Board of Elections website isn't in compliance with the bill that I had sponsored that went into law a few months ago had to do with the term absentee ballot. It's supposed to be mail-in ballot now, and it does not appear that the local Board of Elections website has been updated yet. So just flagging that, and hopefully those changes will be made soon.
Okay.
Delegate
Thank you.
Palakovich Carr, as you know, I think from our prior conversations, one of my pet peeves is that our website needs improvement in about 100 different ways. I will say that for what I would be doing if I were king of our website, which I am not, but I try to be influential where I can, is that I would change it all to say vote by mail, but I would also at various points indicate that that's what used to be known as absentee ballots, because we have the older crowd who is confused by that. And as you know, there are some political leaders who are sowing confusion about what vote by mail means as well. So my own view is that we should try to communicate with everybody in whatever way that they will receive. But we definitely should be in compliance with the law, including the excellent one that you sponsored.
Thank you. So I'm going to turn the questions now over to Senator Lee. She needs to unmute herself, please.
Yeah, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Delegate Shetty. And also thank you, Dave and Jim, for doing this. We're really very grateful. Of
Thank
course,
you.
there's time's running out and there have been concerns. I just want to clarify, and please, if you already mentioned this, please forgive me for bringing it up again. So my understanding is that every voter is going to get a application for an absentee ballot. And then they're going to send out the ballots. Will the applications and also the ballot be in different languages too? Because we're concerned about reaching out to communities of color. And will there be any like PSAs or any other outreach activities being done by the Board of Elections with respect to, communities?
Well, I know.
Thank you for what
Dave,
you've
correct
done
me-
so far.
David, correct me if I'm wrong. The plan was recently to still have a sample ballot with all this information. Yes, there will be notification to the voters on what's going on. The format, depending on when we get a decision, will be sent to the voters.
I'm
form of
not
that-
sure if the sample ballot is, I saw indication that it might have been addressed at yesterday's meeting, but I also didn't get a chance to, I was working
Oh, I
yesterday.
didn't hear that.
Chance
Okay.
to see that. So we'll have to get clarification about that. Everything that we do is required by law to be done in English and Spanish in Montgomery County. What I don't know is, and it's a good question that we should take back, is about other languages for the applications. And I don't know what we've done in the past with that. But I think it would be a good idea for us to, to make it, the application is where it's easiest to, to make changes from what we kind of do generally for everybody. For the ballot, I'm not sure if we're allowed to do additional languages other than English and Spanish, but for the application, I would think that, that we could. And if nothing else, we should have some form. I mean, we typically do have outreach, and as you may know, we've been advertising in a number of different kind of ethnic outlets for to hit different groups in our outreach, and our outreach budget is substantially larger than it was before I got on the board, and I know that we go out wherever we can. And I know that Hilberto has been doing just about every event possible, by Zoom meeting.
Hey,
If you,
Dave, just to interrupt, now Alberto's working on the outreach for all the communities of color. Would he be the person to contact?
Gilberto, yes, he would be.
Alberto, because some of us have other hats. We represent our district, and we also women, but also Asian American, Latino.
Absolutely.
And
Senator, I'd be happy to connect you with
know which ethnic papers to hit, because we know which ones have the hugest circulation, which ones have the credibility, and which
Understood.
ones don't, because you don't waste your money, right? But also, are these applications is there going to be I'm just want to clarify the logistics and process. There's going to be sent to every voter an application saying that you can request an absentee ballot, or do they have to do that themselves, or do they just have to go to the website and request it?
No,
Or
the
is it
actual,
because
the
some kind
actual
of
request.
Yeah.
The actual request is going to be, the form to request it is going to be mailed to every voter. That's
Okay.
that's my understanding.
Okay. And then when
Mailing.
that person sends it in via by mail or email and all whatever, when
Or
they
fax.
get the ballot, if they're in order to be a ballot like in Spanish or in Korean or Chinese, is that defined by law? I guess it is. I don't know. I should know this, but
I believe that I believe that it is, and I believe that
certain percentages, if there's a certain population or something like that.
right. I would have to. Unfortunately, I would have to consult with our board attorney before answering that for you. But as I understand it, there are 2 jurisdictions in Maryland that are required to have both English and Spanish, and that's Prince George's and Montgomery counties. And I believe that is based on past lawsuits and such, but
The
I'm
Board of Elections is not required to, like, if, for instance, someone who is English, who wants a ballot, I don't know, do we print ballots in Korean or Chinese?
I don't believe that we do.
Okay.
And I know we're not required to, and I would suspect that we're not allowed to. But
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that. I'll have to get back to you with the
Okay,
answer to
no
that.
problem. And then Alberto's person that we should contact to help to
Gilberto.
assist you all.
Yeah, I will
in-
connect you. I'll connect you with Gilberto by email, and so that you can talk to him directly.
Is there possibilities for PSAs to be done in?
I think that we try to get PSAs done.
Does your
and-
budget have enough money to be able to do that? Because, we already, we're worried about a little bit of voter suppression in communities of color. And that's something, and new voters, so we're a little concerned about that. So we want to make like an aggressive outreach, but we want to work with you on this so we can achieve our goals of making sure they're able to vote too. And
Well-
I think you've got a difficult job. Thank you, Dave and Jim. Really appreciate it.
Let me say that we have we've been increasing the outreach budget at every opportunity, but I would think that with the unique problems of this election, I personally would support going to the council and executive, and I suspect that they would be amenable to our asking for additional outreach if that's what's necessary in order to get the word out. Now, on the other hand, the state board is supposed to be spending millions of dollars on outreach. I don't know exactly what that's going to entail. And I don't know whether it will accomplish our goals. Our outreach in Montgomery County, what we usually try to do is we try to target a number of different groups, including Asian Americans, including people of color. We try to, it used to be just a few years ago that it was kind of all radio. And then it was like, no, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense, especially as radio is, kind of changing drastically, as you all know. Now it's a mixture of a bunch of different types of different publications, et cetera. I'd be happy to get you, Senator, the listing of what the outreach committee put together and the board adopted. I believe that, I'm trying to remember when that was. Jim, do you remember if that was pre-COVID or if that was?
I think it was pre.
Yeah, so that would give you a sense as to what the plan was. But if it turns out that we need to do more, then obviously, we're happy to do that.
David, if you wouldn't mind, please sending that list to Michelle at the Montgomery County delegation. She can distribute it to the full team. That would be great. Senator, thank you for your wonderful questions. To my district colleague now, Delegate Solomon.
Thanks, Delegate Shetty, and thank you to Delegate Shetty and Delegate Stewart for organizing the briefing. David and Jim, thank you for being here. So I did just have a follow-up question on, I guess, the conversation you were having with Delegate Corman earlier. I know we were sort of joking a little bit about the Postal Service, but there have been some really terrible reports, frankly. In Baltimore, I know Philadelphia is having a really terrible time with mail delivery. And so I guess my question to you, and maybe this is something that the state board should be working on, but have there been conversations with the local representatives from the Postal Service, our local postmasters, to make sure
Yes.
that
Yes.
they have the capacity?
David, didn't Allison's been meeting with them, is that correct?
Yes, our deputy director, Allison McLaughlin, actually has been meeting with them. And in the primary, I can't speak to, as you know, the Postal Service is under new management, and who knows what that will look like. In the primary, there actually was a special hotline for election officials to contact postal officials and tell them about problems. I think it was as a result of a complaint that I made to Allison that she reached out to them, and it turned out that there were a bunch of ballots sitting in Rockville, and there weren't enough people to essentially to get them out. And he called in a bunch of people, the postmaster in that location, to get them out. And I think that's right. I think that is generally, first of all, that's generally our attitude. Our attitude is, keep the mail moving, and that was their attitude as well. What we don't know is how these this new system and new management is going to, is going to affect this. I think that it's pretty likely that, that that's going to make things slower, which again gets to my point about, don't wait, vote early. And if I mean, basically it's, everything we do is like, do it as soon as you can. We have thousands of ballots that get rejected every election because they're postmarked after election day. And we don't have a good system for knowing whether they were late because, other than anecdotally, whether they were late because the voter didn't understand postmarking and waited too long, or because there was something going on in the, in the post office. I know of examples of people who think that if they just put it out for their postman on election day or the day before, that it will be postmarked by election day. And I think that that's a risk that I wouldn't take. My children only use the post office they literally walk into the post office and they get their absentee ballots hand stamped, because they know that in order to make sure you watch them do it. But not everyone can do that, obviously. But I'm very worried about that. And again, I think the message is, do it early. And the other thing is, use the drop boxes if we have them available, and if you're worried about it. Because I think that I mean, it's surprising that we could end up having our system of collection being more reliable than the United States Postal Service. But that may be the era in which we live now.
Yeah, thank you, David. The only other comment I wanted to make was this is an idea that I shared with the state board as well, and you may have heard this already. I mean, it's a Band-Aid on a gaping wound in terms of the election judges, but a couple of other states, I think Ohio has been sort of the most prominent, agreed to give lawyers continuing legal education credits for volunteering as election judges as another sort of creative solution to try to increase recruitment. So like I said, I sent that over to the folks at the state board, but an idea I just wanted to throw out there. I mean, even if it gets us a handful more, it's fewer that we have to recruit in other ways. So
Kelly, I don't know if we said this earlier, but we wrote a unanimous letter to the county executive and the council this week, requesting an extra $100 a day for the election workers. And I think the top judge can make over $300 a day. So we've asked for $100 a day hazardous pay on top of their fee for being a judge and a worker. So we're hoping that the council approves that as an incentive.
Thank you. Great lines of questions. So now turning to you, Vice Chair Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for joining us this morning. I just have 3 quick logistical questions that I've gotten from constituents that I didn't immediately know the answer to. So I just wanted to run them by you, and hopefully, if anyone's watching either now or will watch this playback, they can benefit from it. Number 1 is, I know that in other states, the idea of requiring masks at the polling place has been a point of contention because of the obvious concerns that it's unconstitutional to do so. My question is just, number 1, I want to confirm that masks are not required to vote. I do not believe they were required during the primary. And number 2, I wanted to ask if there's been any talk about giving masks away for free to people who arrive at the polling place without one, because I know that I've heard from 2 of my constituents so far who are worried, who would rather vote in person, but are worried that there's going to be all of these people not wearing masks and potentially, infecting them.
David, my recollection is at the primary, if someone a voter came in without a mask, they would be offered a mask. And if the person refused, they would allow them to vote curbside. I don't know if we had any incidents of that, David, but that was the plan.
I believe that we did, but I don't remember it being curbside, but it was definitely outside of the room.
Correct.
So in the primary, we had 4 voting locations. And my understanding is part of the problem with, if you advertise to people that we're giving out masks, then no one brings a mask, and we have to buy a lot more of them. But I know that anyone who didn't have a mask was offered one. Anyone who refused to wear a mask, we're not denying their right to vote. And I agree with you that would have some significant issues. but we are denying their right to walk into the room because of the problems that that can cause for other people. So so we are trying to accommodate them, you know, in a different, you know, kind of outside of the room in order, you know, in order to do that.
They could vote. It was just where.
Right.
Yeah. That's really helpful. Thank you. Secondly, what is the normal time that it takes after you request a mail-in ballot to receive it? Just because I know a lot of, one of my constituents is just worried that, you know, if it takes 2 weeks, do they need to follow up? And obviously it's already been talked about how, you know, you only want to request it in one way. So what's kind of the general time frame, knowing that I'm sure it differs across households or jurisdictions?
I don't think we can answer that question in any way that's meaningful to this year.
Okay.
Because I think that in this year, we're going to have, you know, hundreds of thousands of requests as opposed to, you know, the amounts that we've had in the past. I know that one of the things that was discussed at the state board yesterday was to add kind of a central location for the state to help process these requests in order to make them faster. And I understand exactly what your constituent is saying, which is that, you know, if you request it now and then weeks and weeks go by, you want to make sure we received your request. I will say that I don't see any problem with people call our office and ask whether the request was received. They can look it up and see whether the request was received. But as to when it will actually get there, I think it's really hard to answer that now. There might have been a standard in the contract that the state put out as to how fast it's supposed to happen, but I don't know what that is.
Okay. Got it.
Jim,
And then
I'm sorry, I didn't know if Jim had anything.
yeah.
Jim?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
And then lastly, after the primary, I heard from an immigrant constituent of mine who was worried about how strict the name matching requirements were for having your ballot counted. And this is probably something that I should just know offhand, but I couldn't find it with a cursory Google search. So how strict do like when you put in your name, how strict is the name matching requirement? Do you have to nail it precisely? Or if you have, you know, 2 surnames or 2 middle names or whatever, and you don't hit it precisely, is your ballot thrown out?
I have never been asked that question before.
Talking about on the ballot itself, on the outside of the ballot?
Yep.
I mean, our view, we've been quite lenient and accommodating on the signatures, you know. David, that hasn't really been an issue.
I think that
no signature is an issue.
right, no signature is an issue. And I mean, basically the idea is that we have to be able to figure out that it is likely the same person. Right. And I don't know what the legal standard is for that. The legal standard might be, I know that for petitions, the legal standard is an exact match.
Right.
But I don't know what the legal standard is for us. We are inclined to try and just figure out whether we think that this is the same person. And now, you know, that kind of cuts both ways though, because if we have somebody with a similar name who votes by a different method, then, you know, it obviously, you know, we have to make sure it's not the same person voting in 2 different methods.
And don't forget, David, there are some people because of age or infirmity that cannot sign their name.
Exactly.
I mean, some people can only put an X or
Right.
some kind of.
And legally, the X
mark.
is sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, legally, you know, the X is a signature. Now, we've had people who did not fill out the oath on the envelope, but instead filled out the voter assistance form. But they weren't the assistant, they were the voter. And we as a board have accepted those as well as basically an attempt to comply you know, with what the law requires. If we were really into the technicalities, they didn't sign the oath for the voter, they signed the oath for someone who's assisting the voter.
But it was under oath.
You know, right. So we definitely make an effort to see what the, you know, what the intent of the voter is and see if it's the same voter.
Correct.
Great. That's helpful. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Great questions. So our final questions for this panel come from Delegate Queen.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for being here. Good to have you here this morning. One of my questions is more clarifying. So October 29th to November the 3rd, I think were the dates we talked about. Does that mean we won't have any other early voting period?
That's my understanding, that's my understanding, that if they implement October 29th through November 3rd, that would be the early voting and election day period. There wouldn't be the October 22nd early voting.
Okay.
And that was,
Right now, yeah.
go ahead,
Well,
Jim.
right now, early voting is October 22nd for 8 days. But if they
For the
implement
tournament.
if they implement October 29th, then that's the beginning of early voting.
And is that the earliest drop boxes would be available, the 29th? Have we talked about the idea that drop boxes could be available October 22nd and beyond?
It's a very good question that we should find out the answer to. I would advocate that we make them available earlier. I know that for the primary, we actually ended up installing the drop boxes a couple of days before we were scheduled to, and the decision was definitely made that we were, you know, once we have them, we would install them.
I agree.
As long as we can have the cameras on them to, you know, to protect them, then we should, you know, we should get as soon as we get them, as it would be what I would say as to when we should install them.
I agree.
You know, but we'll have to
That's a
we'll
good
have to see.
suggestion. I agree, yeah.
Delegate Queen, I'd be curious to know, not that I'm the one who gets to decide it, as to whether you would advocate that we have early voting plus the, you know, October 29th to November 3rd.
Yes, I would advocate for that, correct.
Okay.
So that was, you know, that is something I would hope that we could put on the table.
Right, and the only issue I would have with that is just, again, it comes down, it's a numbers, you know, the numbers of people
Sure.
required to work it. And although if we spread it out over more days and if we have fewer places over more days instead of more places in fewer days, we don't need as many people if they can work multiple days. But it's also going to be very taxing on people if they're going to be working all day, every day for, you know, 14
Understood.
days in a row. So
The other questions around the 25 polling centers and also the talk about possibly 12 drop boxes. What's the plan around that? How did you come up with these numbers, and how would you, you know, decide where the centers are? Is there any insight into that? Because I would want to know, possibly, you know, may we need more than 12 drop boxes? How are we going to have some sense of, you know, what areas are going to be targeted with this plan? Is that plan available for us to look at?
Yeah,
and look to see?
Delegate, the 12, we asked for, we have 6. We asked for 6 more to accommodate the existing early voting sites. That was before this plan by the state board has come up with possible voting centers. If we have more than the early voting sites, if we do have 25, I certainly would advocate getting more drop boxes. Absolutely. The 12 were designed to cover.
Okay, that gives me insight in how you came up with those numbers. So possibly getting more is still on the table.
I would like to, if it's 20, yes, the more the better. But
and
again,
I-
there's a cost component, which is not important to me. It's $2,000 a box.
That
But
is
they have
not
to be-
important to any of us. So
I
yeah.
agree. No, I agree. But the key is that they're within a certain security perimeter of cameras. So locate not
Understood.
that's a component.
but every high school has cameras. So you know, it has the advantage for some of the primary locations. I think we had to get cameras installed for.
Correct.
If it's in the high schools, I'm pretty sure, I know they all have cameras inside. I'm pretty sure they all have cameras outside. So I would just say that the 12, as I'm sure you know, Delegate Queen, from all of our discussions about early voting in the past, that's the 11 early voting sites plus one at the Board of Elections. We were not successful in getting the 12th early voting site that we were seeking to get. But we do have a unanimous view of our board that there should be the drop boxes at all of the early voting sites, and the 25 was not our number. That was the state talking about using the high schools, and that's the number of high schools. So that was not a decision that we made, and I'm not sure that it's going to be, it may be up to us if they allow us to have the additional locations beyond the high schools, like I was talking about for Silver Spring Civic Building. Then there might be a decision to be made by the local board as to where any additional sites would go. But if they tell us, I don't know if they're going to say to us, you get 25, you pick, or if they're going to tell us, put them in all the public high schools. The one advantage that we do have with the high schools is that under state law, the school system is required to make them available to us. So they do not have an option to say we're not participating. And so that means that, and with the plans that the school system now has not to have in-person learning at that time, then there's less of a public health and issue as there would have been if they were having school on Monday and we were coming in on Tuesday, obviously it's still a very important public health issue as to how we handle that, but it's not, we should be able to get access to school buildings.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Queen, for the excellent questions, and to all my colleagues for all of your excellent questions, and special thanks to Mr. Neiman and Mr. Shalek for all of the important work you're doing to ensure that we have a successful election this November. We are going to conclude panel 1 of this briefing, but I ask to the extent that you are available, please, David and Jim, stay on for panel 2, because we have with us today some really wonderful advocacy organizations who have some thoughts on ways to ensure that all voters have access to their ballots in a safe manner. I think we all studied the elections, the primary elections, the cycle, and many of these groups have been active even prior to on elections, and making sure that everyone has access to their ballot is very important to all of us. So we're going to begin panel 2 now, and we will start with Joanne from Common Cause. You have 5 minutes, please, to deliver your testimony, and then we will do, sorry, just a quick bit of housekeeping. Then we will go to CASA and then to the National Council of Jewish Women Maryland Action Team, after which we will do Q&A from members. So 5 minutes for each advocate, please. And then if you would like to be added to the queue, please note it in the chat and I will keep a running list. Thank you. So apologies, Joanne, please continue.
No problem. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Shetty, Vice Chair Stewart, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me all to join, for inviting me to join you all today. For the record, again, my name is Joanne Antoine, Executive Director of Common Cause Maryland. We are a nonpartisan watchdog organization that's been working in the state for 50 years to strengthen our democracy. And one of our core issue areas is voting rights. So ensuring all eligible voters, all eligible Maryland voters that are able to vote and have their vote counted. And obviously this applies even during a public health crisis. Before I make my comments, I first just want to say that we recognize that the state and local boards have been having to conduct 3 and MoCo 2 elections in a very stressful time with a very limited capacity and resources and limited time, right? And that a lot of these changes are new. So even in our advocacy, we do believe that the staff, at the local and state boards, that you all are working similar to us to ensure that no Marylander is disenfranchised and that they're able to vote safely in the coming election. Now, during the special election and the primary, Maryland did take swift action to protect the public's health. While the messaging that's been coming out of the governor's office has been a bit confusing, similar to the situation we were in during those previous 2 elections, Maryland continues to function under a state of emergency. We renewed that state of emergency at the end of July, which which gives the governor the control, the authority to change the election process, similar to what he's done in the previous 2 elections. And you know, in those previous 2 elections, the governor made the right call, right? And we supported him in making a number of changes and instructing the State Board of Elections to automatically mail all active registered voters a ballot. And, you know, with our advocacy, that included limited in-person options as well. And because of these necessary changes, you know, over 97% of those who voted by mail, right? Or by drop box, I'd say. They returned the ballot that was mailed to them. We also saw increase in turnout in a number of jurisdictions. I think Baltimore City sticks out the most because I think Baltimore City may have had the highest or one of the highest participations in the state. And I also believe we saw an increase even in the special election, right? It was the first time we saw that many voters participate in an election to fill a vacancy. And you know, while there were a number of issues, most of which could have been avoided, we do believe there are issues that could be easily addressed. And, you know, I think it's important to note that when we were raising all of these issues during the primary, right after, it wasn't in opposition of conducting the general election hybrid, right? Mailing ballots with a combination of in-person. It was because we knew that there'd be enough time to begin addressing these issues leading up to November. So, you know, whatever messaging that's been used against vote by mail in raising these issues, again, that was not the intention. It was to make sure that we were addressing them going into November. And we still believe that the safest way forward for Marylanders is mailing out ballots, although the governor has opted to move forward with the normal election. Sorry, I'm reading notes, but you know, the normal election, he made this decision a few weeks ago. Outside of opening all of the locations, Marylanders will be mailed an application, which is costing the state over $5.6 million, money that could have been invested into voter education and outreach, for instance. And, you know, while the state board did not provide recommendations on how to conduct the election, they all did agree that they didn't want to move forward with a normal election, right? And that's what the governor has opted for. You know, even though the local boards or MAEO on a number of occasions, you know, led a rigorous advocacy effort calling for a hybrid election, again, the governor opted otherwise. And you know, it may have seemed like the right decision at that time. I think Maryland was in a place where we were starting to open things up. But the last few weeks have presented us with information that shows that we need to shift this decision, right? CDC has made clear that we should be doing everything in our power to limit the amount of people that need to go vote in person. Health experts here in Maryland, Dr. Sharfstein, for example, has said that we need to maximize the use of mail in order to help flatten the curve here in the state. And scientists from the Union of Concerned Scientists has said that we should shift the population to vote by mail. It'll provide them with more option and it helps us avoid wait lines on election day, which is the real concern. And even though we're running out of time, we're continuing to call on the governor to change his mind. He still has time. Mail all active registered voters a ballot. You know, we also support MAEO's, the Maryland Association of Election Officials recommendations, you know, including shifting to vote centers, which would help address the lack of poll workers that we have available, and also help to alleviate voter confusion. We support moving up the canvas date, similar to like we did in the primary, as well as establishing a centralized vote by mail application processing center. You know, and we support these because we know that if these changes aren't made, the communities that will suffer the most are the communities that have the highest populations of voters of color. So Prince George's, Baltimore City, Montgomery County as well. And I know that the board plans to hopefully address this at their Friday meeting. I know that I'm running out of time. I did want to flag just some additional concerns. I know yesterday at the State Board of Elections meeting, they mentioned shortening the time for requesting ballots. And while we understand why that might be necessary with the paper request, we believe that Marylanders should still be able to go online and request their ballot as close as possible to the 27th. Again, if our goal is to maximize the people that are using mail. And, you know, also acknowledging that a lot of people won't be able to drive up to a local board office, assuming they even know where those offices are, to pick up a ballot. Also we're okay with shifting the early voting period. But, you know, if we move to vote centers, there should be no reason for us to cut down the number of early voting days. You know, all research has shown us that we should be doing everything in our power to maximize the number of days that people can go in person. So if we're moving the period, it should be 8 days and election day if vote centers are available. And we're also, you know, continue to be concerned about the request of electronic ballots. I believe the number shared yesterday was 40,000, and we don't know. Obviously, we know that a number of those requests were made from people who need to use ballot marking devices, and that should be available to them. But we want to make sure we're communicating to voters. And I think some changes have been made online, but it needs to be sent in the mail as well, that you need to print, have your own have your own envelope, you need a stamp, you know, and so forth, right? And that the canvas process is going to take a lot longer because we have to duplicate it. And then obviously there's election security concerns, which we've asked the state board to address, right? You know, how they plan, as we're increasing the number of people who are making these requests, you know, how do we plan to ensure that there is no interference or, you know, changing of names or manipulating of email addresses and so forth. So I'll wrap it up in just saying that, again, Maryland is still in a crisis. We have no idea what October and November is going to look like. And we need to be doing everything in our power to ensure that all Marylanders can vote safely. And that includes mailing out applications if there's time, but if not, moving forward with MAEO's recommendations. Thank you
so much. Really appreciate those thoughtful pieces of feedback for our local board. So now moving to our witness from CASA. Catherine, I'm a little confused because I see your name and picture 3 times. So I will turn it to you to recognize whoever from your organization is providing testimony today.
Thank you so much, Chair Shetty and Vice Chair Stewart. I really appreciate it. Not sure what's going on with my name showing up so much. But what I am going to do today is talk with you guys briefly for just 2 or 3 minutes, and then I will pass it off to one of our community leaders from Montgomery County, Jonathan Hernandez, who's going to share how he's directly been impacted in his experience with the elections. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. And if you can just nod if you can see it. Okay, awesome. So I just want to give a shout out to Joanne. She did such a great job outlining not just what Common Cause thinks about what should happen when it comes to November, but really what many advocates, including CASA, agree with and believe should happen. And so since she gave such a great in-depth testimony, I want to be brief and talk more broadly about some of the work that we're doing and what we've been seeing on the ground. So CASA is one of the largest immigrant-based organizations. We have over 100,000 lifelong members. We work to build power and improve life for working class and immigrant communities. And of course, you guys all know building power starts with voting. So I want to go through kind of the 3 key lessons learned from the primary. And the first thing that we learned was that mailing ballots directly to voters worked. It worked for us. We were able to engage, despite everything going on, we were able to engage with many community members. And ultimately, we saw a huge uptick in voting from our community compared to previous primaries, which was a pretty big deal. And so we're still waiting to get some of that data in, but overall, we've heard from our elections team that it has been more successful than we imagined, which has been great. The next lesson, we need more polling locations. All of this was already alluded to, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but we have many stories of people who were waiting in line for over 2+ hours. That there weren't locations that were close enough to their homes, and that was one of the biggest problems that they faced. And then finally, more education is needed. Many of our members that we spoke to on the ground did not know ballots were going to be mailed, right? We had to do a lot of the heavy lifting on educating people. So there needs to be greater efforts from the state to make sure that this happens. Now, as I said, Joanne really laid all of these items out very thoroughly, what needs to happen, what we believe needs to happen to prepare for the November elections. And the number one thing that we are asking is that all voters receive a ballot via mail. And that, like we said, from the primary, we learned that that worked, and that really worked for immigrant families in particular. So if it's too late to do that, we are going to work as hard as we can to make sure everyone gets registered and requests their ballot and gets it in time. But it's, as far as we know, there is power for that to still happen, and we are continuing to advocate for that. Many of these other points here have been alluded to and thought through very thoroughly by Jim and David, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. But very straightforward things like making sure that the centers are very safe, that the recruitment and training for our poll workers are very thorough, especially when it comes to working with non-English speakers. Making sure that voter registration forms are mailed. And again, a really, really big effort for public education. And that has to be targeted to Spanish and French media. Always we need more support in that area. I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about the bigger picture when it comes to immigrants who are voting. I know we're really focused in on the immediate needs of November, but it's really important to know that there are many, many things that need to be addressed on both the state and federal level. Right now, immigrants are facing a lot of challenges. There are hundreds of thousands of immigrants who are here and do not have any pathway to citizenship. But I want to speak briefly to the people who do have a pathway to citizenship, our green card holders. Maryland has around 150,000 green card holders who are eligible for citizenship, which means they meet all the requirements. They've been here for however many years. They have worked and lived in the United States for however many years, and fulfill anything that's needed. However, there are significant barriers to getting your citizenship, and we know citizenship equals voting. For example, one of the biggest barriers is the financial issue. Right now, it costs $725 to apply for citizenship. And USCIS just increased the fee and now costs over $1,200 to apply for citizenship. Montgomery County did partner with CASA, so we were able to provide scholarships for people. But I just want to put this in context to let you guys know we have a bigger long-term problem on making sure that everyone is represented when it comes to getting people to the polls. And then finally, there are several, the Voting Rights Act needs to be passed. Federal legislation needs to be passed to make sure voter suppression and discrimination across the board is prevented. So I'll stop there and leave it to questions and pass it on to Jonathan. But I just want to respond briefly to what Delegate Stewart mentioned earlier on about name matching requirements. Luckily, we have not seen that be a humongous issue in Maryland. So that is actually something that Maryland is doing very well. And our neighbors, unfortunately, are not. We've seen in Pennsylvania that has been a massive form of voter suppression. At CASA, we really believe that winning in Maryland means also winning the presidency. So we're doing a lot of work in several different districts in Virginia, in Pennsylvania, to make sure that we can flip those states and make sure that we win the presidency. So I'll stop talking and pass it to Jonathan. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Catherine Paul. Thank you, Madam Chair, and for the rest of the elected officials who are giving me the opportunity to speak. So I just want to start off by saying that the first time that I've went and vote was the 2016 presidential election. And me living in Langley Park at the time, people would think that Langley Park is such a small area, but it's rather big, as you might see. Last time I checked that, the population in Langley Park is well near 20,000. So that's pretty much a big number in terms of area. Which brings me to me saying that my polling location was at the Langley Park McCormick Elementary School. And as I stepped inside, it was, I want to say that it was a moderate crowd, and the demographics are rather mixed. I want to estimate saying that there was around 50% Latinos who were in the polling location, as well as other people from different ethnic backgrounds, right? And so as I stepped in, and I was just kind of observing, you know, who was there, you know, what they were actually doing. And I thought to myself, you know, based on what I've observed, the Latino community does need a lot of help, because not many people, you know, it was basically their first time voting, or they just don't understand how the process works, and they encountered a lot of errors, and they just needed a lot of guidance and a lot of assistance. And so after 2016, you know, that's when I thought to myself, and that's when I voiced out my concern that, you know, the Latino community needs a lot of representation, not just a lot of representation, but a lot of assistance and a lot of guidance to, you know, be a part of what we're fighting for as of right now. And so fast forward 4 years later, we did not expect to be in this pandemic that we're facing right now. As of right now, I live in Silver Spring, and the last time I went, the past primary election, there was the Civic Building where I was able to go and mail in my ballot. And so I would say that, you know, mailing in ballots does actually work, because there's a lot of people coming in and out mailing in ballots before the actual election date. And so I know that I'm about to yield my time very soon. I just wanted to say that, you know, mail-in ballots is really effective. It is really helpful, and it does give us the power to make a change. However, we do need a lot of representation, not just within, you know, the area in itself, but also with the Latino communities. You know, no matter if they're from Langley Park, no matter if they're from Silver Spring, no matter if they're in Hyattsville, abroad, you know, we need the representation that we need to get in terms of assistance, in terms of guiding. And so I figured, you know, we should, there should be some sort of training to how we may be able to assist people, whether if it's their first time, or if they run into some errors on how to like fill out ballots, how to, you know, what is the correct way to fill out a ballot. I feel as if there should be some sort of training prior to election day for people who is their first time, or if they encounter any errors. And so with that being said, I do feel like, you know, mail-in ballots is really effective, and that we should all cast in our votes.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, I yield my time.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jonathan and Catherine, for your helpful feedback. Really appreciate CASA's engagement on these issues. So now we're going to turn to our third advocate, Leslie Frost with the National Council of Jewish Women's Maryland Action Team.
Thank you, Delegate Shetty. Thank you all very much, and good afternoon. I know this has been a long session. I'm going to try and keep this brief, because many of the things that I wish to talk about have been touched upon, but I still feel that it's incumbent upon me to raise them as well. So first of all, my name is Leslie Frost. I represent members of the National Council of Jewish Women who live in the state of Maryland. And today I'm speaking specifically for the 350 members who reside in Morris County. We are an advocacy group. We have been doing things and we have been working for 125 years. The National Council of Jewish Women has brought together activists across generations and across the country to safeguard individual rights and freedoms. Following the all vote by mail June 2nd primary, we were in touch with the State Board of Elections to voice the concerns about the things that we found problematic. And that included voter education that did not really address what citizens were being asked to do when they voted by mail. There were design flaws in the ballot, access to polling places, staffing issues. So I know you have touched on these, and I know we're in a difficult time when some of these issues have not yet been resolved. But you have to realize how anxious the public is, because we're balancing our right to vote against our health concerns. And also because large numbers of us will be first-time voters, or it will be the first time that they are mailing in a ballot to vote. And these citizens are probably very concerned that they do not, quote, do it right, and their vote will be discounted. Information on what to do, how to do it, and when to do it is paramount. Now, my NCJW members are informed and we pay attention, but we missed all the marketing and advertising that the State Board said they used for the June primary. So we feel that we need regular, updated public service announcements spread over all forms of media. And especially now when so many are advocating to the governor to change some of these decisions, we need this even more. I'm afraid an announcement on a website or a video on a website does not reach the majority of our voters. As far as absentee ballot goes, we have been monitoring the websites of both the state and at local levels, and we didn't see any, we could fail to see information about what was happening about the applications being sent out. So we told our members, apply online now for your absentee mail-in ballots. And we also told them to download the applications and hand them to all those people they know who do not have access to a computer. This is a very extraordinary time that we're all facing. And in this particular area of information to the public, we feel that both the state, at both the local and the government level, has to give us more guidance. Now, the concerns about absentee ballots are compounded by the reported slowdown in the postal service. And you have addressed some of our concerns about secure drop boxes, and I'm very happy to be able to tell my members that you are seriously thinking about increasing the number of them, but they definitely have to be available because, as some of you have already expressed, there are concerns about the security, the validity, the speed of whatever of the postal service. So of course that also brings me to the issue of polling places. One of my questions was, if we do not have the requisite number of polling places available, what was your plan B? Well, obviously you are already discussing your plan B as to going to vote centers, which I think would be a great improvement. And I sincerely hope that the governor agrees to this, because the issue of providing personnel, as was pointed out by both of the representatives from the Board of Elections, is extremely serious. Again, we, and I'm sure many other nonprofits, have been reaching out to our members and urging them to become election workers if they are not eligible themselves, to pass the information on. But there again, notices on your websites is not enough to inform the public that there is this serious deficit in workers on polling day and during the early voting session. You need that information out. Now, if, as our delegation has suggested, if the board gets the information to them, they will pass it on to us. I can assure you that I will pass it on to my membership across the state, and they in turn will pass it on to all their social contacts and all the different lists through which they work. So we've been working on this issue, since 1893, the National Council of Jewish Women has been working on issues that are important for the moment. And in this moment, reform of the election system, access to the ballots, making it easier to register and to cast a vote is very important. We really understand, we know how much you are working, we appreciate everything that the board and our delegation is doing. But we do respectfully ask that you increase your efforts, that you improve your efforts, and that you inform and educate the public so that the November 20th election is safe and accessible to us all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Frost, for your insightful comments. So while I wait for colleagues to notify me via the chat, if you have any questions for advocates, I'm going to ask the first one. Ms. Frost, you and I previously spoke on the phone about some of the concerns your organization has around access to the ballot, particularly for voters with disabilities. And I know you said that you have some members who have shared anecdotes about challenges that they face. So I'm wondering if you might please, I apologize for putting you on the spot, but if you wouldn't mind, please sharing a little bit of insight into what the current flaws are in the existing plan and what you think can be done better to ensure access for voters with disabilities.
Well, thank you. Unfortunately, I'm not the expert in this area. I'm just representing what my members have told me. It's not only the question of them being able to get to a polling place, and our organization, and I'm sure many other nonprofits have also been in the business of helping people who needed rides to get them there. And that again, this year, we're seriously compromised as to how we can help people with disabilities and also the elderly get to the polling places if they can. For the elderly, we are hoping to solve that problem through the absentee mail-in ballot. But for people with disabilities, some of them, it's not just a question of getting to the polling place. They need somebody who can help them because they have hearing problems, they have vision problems, and some of them have cognitive problems, which includes that they need a trained worker to explain the ballots to them and to help work them through it. And I'm sure in some cases, this also, sometimes also this is compounded by language issues. Perhaps they're not, English is not their first language. So when we talk about training new poll workers, I hope that the board will be very cognizant that these people must be trained to be very, shall we say, very cognizant of people with disabilities and also people with language needs, so that they are not scared off, disenfranchised, or their votes are not made more difficult. I wish I had more concrete examples for you, but I don't. But I'm sure I can put you in touch with many of my members who would like to speak to you at length if you would like that information.
Thank you, Ms. Frost. Joanne or Catherine, do you all have any recommendations on this specific topic?
I mean, this is where we typically would lean a lot on Disability Rights Maryland, National Federation of the Blind. I know Ben Jackson from Disability Rights Maryland has said, similar to what Leslie shared, how the lack of well-trained judges at these locations, how that makes it that much more difficult for the individual who is coming to the facility, to the polling centers. I think, for example, a lot of times you'd see judges, they're able to come to the door, come outside, help that person just getting inside the building, right? And when we don't have enough judges at these locations, they won't be able to do that. That's just one example. But again, this is where I lean on the advocates, and they share concerns with us.
Thank you. Catherine, any additional feedback? Nope.
spot on. There are advocates who have been working tirelessly on making sure that folks with disabilities have access. I think one of the biggest pieces to come away with is that there has to be trained, really well trained poll workers.
Great, thank you. Colleagues, any questions for our advocates? Okay, well, we have a little bit of additional time left, so I don't know if, I know we had not planned on this, but I would like to give the opportunity, if possible, to Mr. Shalek and Mr. Naiman. Again, if you have any responses or thoughts based on the testimony and questions with our advocates, we could use a little bit of the remaining time for that if you wish.
Well, Delegate, let me first say thank you for this hearing. And I thought the advocates were excellent, and I certainly will take all these suggestions and concerns they have to the board. But it's been very helpful. We're doing everything we can to make this a fair and complete election. And I want to assure everybody of that. And David and I are working hand in hand with our board to make this work. We don't have the final plan, so we can't make the final efforts until we know the final plan. But once we do, we're all in together to make this work. Thank you.
Thank you, that's very reassuring. Mr. Naiman, anything?
I agree completely. I think it was very helpful to hear from you all. I would say under normal circumstances, I would absolutely be in favor of as many days of early voting and as many as we can. I'm very concerned about the practical aspect of that, given the the personnel that we need. I think we just have to figure out how to find as many people as we can and implement the election with those people. But I appreciate very much your all's continued efforts in this regard. I also agree wholeheartedly with the idea that I would have preferred that we mail a ballot to every voter. Obviously, I'm not even the majority on our board, let alone have the ability to influence the governor. I'm sure you all know that we're 60% of the voters of Montgomery County on the Democratic side, but we are not in the majority because the state law says that it's controlled by the party of the governor. So, but as Jim says, we've been working together and in trying to make this as as safe and as available for eligible voters as we can. And we appreciate all your help and hope that you'll reach out to us if there's anything specific that you'd like us to do. I would like to comment to Ms. Frost that I agree completely that putting things on our website is not enough. I will say, though, that I consider that to be an important first step at which we are frequently failing. So if you hear me say, which I do with some regularity, and if you were to attend our meetings, it's almost every meeting, and in between meetings, I'm saying it as well. Why isn't it on our website? I think I said it last night. Why isn't it on our website, all of the efforts we're making to make these polling places safe? Because that's something that we're actually doing. But if I'm considering whether to be an election judge, it's nowhere on our website. Like you said, how to apply for the absentee ballots, nowhere on our website. I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's not easy.
No, it's not. And our website is not easy to follow. And although it's way better than it was when I got on the board in 2011, but let me tell you that we have a long way to go. And we really need to hire some millennials and others to bolster our website. And again, I know that does not mean that when you put it on the website, it gets out to everyone. There's lots of people who don't have web access. There's lots of ways to get the word out to people. But I do think it's an important start, because I can tell you that for people who are able to use the internet, they kind of expect to be able to go there and get some basic information. Now, my hope is that once we have the actual plan from the state, that we will get that information up as quickly as possible. And I think that part of the concern is that everything we put up today could be changed tomorrow. Now, I realize that the counter to that is that, okay, then we can change our website tomorrow. So there's no question that, we should be getting whatever the most current information is out there. But anyway, when you hear us talking about trying to improve our website, please know that we realize that that's not the end goal. That is just one step along the way to getting the word out.
Thank you, Mr. Neiman. Those are excellent comments. So we'll turn the floor over to Vice Chair Stewart, and then I will close out.
Great. So I just had one comment following up on the discussion about the ease of the use of the state online tool, which is that I heard from the vice chair of the delegation, Al Carr, this morning, who heard from the State Board of Elections, who it sounds like they're in the process of streamlining their online system, and it could be ready to go within the week. And so hopefully that's the case, because obviously it was pointed out already by you, David, that you would recommend people send email PDFs rather than even deal with the sort of maze that is the current request for a ballot. So I just wanted to note that.
Yes, and I appreciate I don't know exactly how they're simplifying it and whether they're simplifying it enough. I think that Madam Chair said at the beginning of the meeting that she had heard that it was coming, but we don't know exactly how simple it's going to be. In my experience, it treats you like you are registering to vote for the first time because they use the same system for voter registration. So part of what makes it complicated is that as you're going along and you think that you're being asked questions that you shouldn't be asked because you already are registered to vote. Like it asks you if you want a voter registration card. Now there's no harm in getting a second voter registration card, but it's a question that I think throws people off. Because you think that you think that it should be reasonably simple to request an absentee ballot. The other question that I've gotten from people in my neighborhood was, when are you required to give your driver's license information? Because when you go onto the online system, you are required to give your driver's license information and your issue date of your driver's license. The issue date on your driver's license is one of the few parts of your driver's license that I can't just go to a website and figure out. I mean, if I have your birthday, I can go to a website and figure out your driver's license number, but not your issue date of your driver's license. So the idea is to try and make sure it's you for a system where we don't have, where there's no signature. But that also just kind of adds to the confusion for many people. And that information is not required if you use the PDF form, you just sign it.
And then one last question. This is something that also came from a constituent of mine. It can really go to any of you, but what would you recommend for a voter who is a little bit transient and is worried, even whether they're an unhoused individual or whether they're just going to be moving or whether they're a student, and they're worried about, applying for an application, but maybe they don't necessarily have access to that mailbox when the application would come. This has obviously been an issue nationwide as we move more and more towards mail-in voting. What's sort of the best practice there? I know in Maryland you can put sort of like an agent or just like any place that you can receive mail, even if it's not your home address or any place, in fact, you've ever lived. But yeah, if anyone would just want to expound on that about if you were talking to a voter now who was concerned about that, what your suggestion would be.
I think you hit the nail on the head is to inform us as to where they have a concrete address to receive mail and a location where we know how to contact them. That's important, is to update where they are. And we'll use that.
And if they don't have that, and if they're able to come in person, that is the category of person who is most likely to need to show up in person.
Yeah, and I'd say that's also, I actually talked to a voter just like that 2 days ago. She doesn't know where she'll be. She doesn't have an address to send it to. She does not want to vote in person. So that's the rare instance where I told her that there was this electronic ballot, available to her. Again, we don't recommend it all the time, but her situation just seemed like she wouldn't be able to get the ballot wherever she is. She doesn't know where she'll be in September, let alone November. So electronic works for her as long as she has access to a printer.
It's an
Uh,
excellent,
and-
excellent suggestion.
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree with that suggestion. I would say that, as I understand it, the information that comes with that ballot will not be entirely clear about where it should be mailed to, and it should be mailed to the Montgomery County Board of Elections. And I do think that's a good example. There's a huge percentage of people, though, who get the online ballot delivery and somehow they never download their ballot. I don't remember exactly what the percentage is, but it's way more than it should be. So, and I'm hoping, because I have suggested this to our staff, that we'll put out some information that says if you get an email from this rather unusual looking return address, that's your ballot, or at least that's your link to your ballot. And I'm hoping that we can put that information out in any way that we can. But it may very well be that they just have to kind of be paying particularly close attention to their emails in that circumstance to make sure that they don't miss it.
Excellent. Thank you so much to all who have joined us today. We're so grateful to everybody who joined on both panels for our Board of Elections, for your tireless work in ensuring everyone has access to their ballot. Every election is challenging, this one especially so, given the state of everything else that is around us, but we know that you're up to the task, and we're so grateful as well for all of the advocacy organizations that have worked for many, many years on voter outreach and education and voting rights issues. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you to my colleagues for joining and for your excellent questions. Mr. Naiman and Mr. Shalek, we will likely be following up with a letter with maybe some additional questions that we weren't able to ask today. So keep an eye on email for that. And best of luck. Let us know how we can be helpful as we move forward towards ensuring a really safe election for all. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and we will connect again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate the opportunity.